The landscapes of our lives are for learning, where experience is our teacher. When we gather together to share our resources, we are destined to love and thrive. Hello, Pierre.
Hey, Maureen, good morning.
Good morning.
As usual, what are we talking about today?
I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, not really about him, but some of the work that he's done. Jonathan Haidt, Haidt. I think in prior podcasts, I'm sure we must have referenced him at some point, but where we were talking about narrative and some other things about, kind of the state of politics and how we're not really talking to each other, and also kind of our level of nervous system regulation and fragility and emotional security and things like that. I don't know, I just thought of him and his article that he wrote with Greg Lukianoff called The Coddling of the American Mind, which appeared, I think, in the Atlantic Monthly in either 2015 or 2016. And then he and Lukianoff ended up writing a book because the article was very well, highly read or whatever.
Yeah,
and
kind of went viral.
created sort of a stir. And I think a lot of what I was seeing as a teacher working with students, it really resonated. The article really resonated with me, and interesting still now that I'm in the world of psychology and mental health, that still continuing to see the fallout of what we were seeing in universities and even high schools, and the change in trigger warnings and treatment of kids and this fragility thing.
Right.
So anyways, that I wanted to talk a little bit about him and some of the concepts in his book.
Okay, excellent. I want to talk about Jonathan Haidt too. Let me, if it's okay, let me do a little thumbnail sketch and background, because super interesting guy. Grandparents were immigrants from Russia and Poland, grew up in New York, and he studied philosophy. So you're going to like that because you studied philosophy from Yale University. Then he got his PhD in psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. So we share that alma mater. But we also share something interesting. Right now, he is the Thomas Cooley Professor of Ethical Leadership at NYU Stern School of Business. And there's a couple of reasons why that's interesting. So Thomas Cooley was my professor.
At UPenn?
At the New York. I also got a degree from Stern.
Oh, you did? I didn't know
business.
that.
Yeah.
I thought you went to Wharton all these years.
I went to Penn I went to University of Pennsylvania in the Graduate School of Fine Arts for my natural resource planning. They called it regional planning, but it's kind of environmental planning in its early days. As contrasted with city planning, which is, streets and infrastructure and people. Regional planning is natural systems and environmental systems and people.
Interesting. Fun fact here. Yeah. And then what'd you go to Stern for?
Master's in business.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I thought. Okay.
So this guy's it's got a degree in psychology, and you're going to find some of his writings interesting. The happiness hypothesis, finding truth, modern truth in ancient wisdom. I mean, it sounds exactly like your book.
Yeah, I want to read that. I haven't read that yet, but I read his second one, the one you're about to say. What else did he write?
This is another great title, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion. And then you get a little later on to The Coddling of the American Mind, good intentions and bad ideas are setting up a generation for failure.
Right. Which that subtitle, I'm just gonna tag onto that. Can you
Yep.
say it again just quickly?
Of the Coddling of the American Mind?
Yeah, the subtitle.
Yes, the subtitle is How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure.
Right. And I kind of just want to tag onto that and point out that one of that thesis of this book that we're going to talk about is it's not the kids' fault. Right? It's like it's not about the kids being the way they are. It's about
that's so nice to hear.
Good intentions that the adults have based on bad ideas that are setting up our future children and generations for not great things, but making them weaker rather than stronger. So,
right.
So that subtitle is like kind of the main point of the, it's an important point of the book.
Yeah, I really appreciate your pointing out that it's not the kid's fault, right? This is coming from somewhere. When I was in college, I learned something from a professor, David Thomas. He was my anthropology professor, and Harvey Botwin, an economics professor. These guys were amazing in a college. I just learned so much. But one thing I learned, which I did not learn in high school, I did not learn from my parents, was this concept of unintended consequences. And that is informed so much of my thinking. And it relates to what you were saying, Maureen, good intent, and what Jonathan Haidt has as a subtitle, good intentions, bad ideas. And we have a good intention to fix something, and then we do it, and it even seems like a good idea, but the consequences, it just doesn't work in reality.
Well, and so let's just quickly think about that and apply that to this whole debate of surgical transitioning for children who are transgender. Like apply that. It's like, it's a good idea. We have compassion. We don't want people to suffer. We fear, the fallout of, not helping or supporting or validating or affirming. But like maybe there's just some bad ideas there too, even though the intentions are pure and good.
And you're talking about children, people,
right? Children,
people under the age of 18, and in other contexts, people have very good intentions and worry about, how parents are treating children, and with great reason, if they're hitting or abusing or doing different things, or take drugs for that matter, and all the early age consumption of chemicals. And we outlaw smoking, but a lot of other things are okay. So
I think it just applies to problem solving in general. Like when we're trying to come together as a society or a group and solve a problem, of course, emotions are a big part of this. And Jonathan Haidt's a social psychologist, moral psychology, like that's what his focus is.
Yeah.
And so it's like moral psychology, like good and bad ideas, right and wrong, rules to live by, socially in groups, and negotiating what's best for everybody and each individual. Like this is so hard, right? And this is why these topics are sensitive and controversial, and people get emotional and defensive, and it's hard to talk about them. But we're doing a podcast called Learning Conversation, so it's like we need to be able to talk about these things without it degenerating into accusations that you're insensitive, that you don't care about people, that you're prejudiced or whatever. It's like we need to be able to kind of step back with some regulation, look at the problem together, and really examine the ideas one by one, and try to anticipate the fallout, like 5 steps down the line of that idea. And we can't
Right.
predict
Well,
it all,
outcomes.
right?
I mean, you know, let's look at outcomes. You can have a good idea and you can have a logical inference as to what that is going to do for somebody or yourself. And, you know, outcomes based. I find it interesting that he's the professor of ethical leadership. And he started some, you know, kind of newish field in psychology called positive morals or something like that.
He was
With
also, yeah,
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go right ahead.
He's also started, he was seeing, this is kind of like, it's related but separate. I think he created an organization for heterodoxy, for a more balanced
It's the
idea.
Heterodox Academy. Yeah.
Yeah. Because in higher ed, you know, the percentage of liberal leaning professors was like 95 to 5%. Oh, and it was just not a balanced, you know, ideological departments. And so just I think he did a lot of work around that to try to increase the heterodoxy in higher ed.
Yeah, he did. Viewpoint diversity started, he co-founded this nonprofit, Heterodox Academy, in 2015. And it's interesting that, you know, he's at Stern, a business school, as a psychologist. And when I was at Stern, they have under the leadership of trying to remember the dean's name at that time. Cooley, by the way, later went on to be the dean, but the dean that I had was just so enlightened. And my professor in leadership, Professor Guth, I got so much ethical value out of business school that it was just incredible, the strong traditions they had around ethics at Stern. It was just
but
off the chart.
Pierre, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here and give you the other side. They were all white males.
Devil's
their
advocate.
ethical
You could just
weren't diverse enough to, you know, and the people, you know, no, I'm really, this is the
my dear Wormwood.
Yeah. This is the ongoing debate though, right? It's like, okay.
Well,
which ethics, right? Which ethics for what groups? And it's, you know, this is the ideological view of, like, you know, it's all about power and oppression, according to, you know, neo-Marxism, all of those ideological ideas of the left-leaning higher ed. This is what it's been since 1980s, 90s and on. And people don't know because we're out working in the world, but like this is what our children who go to college now are getting as the ethics, the way. And okay, like, so I'm just saying,
it's interesting because
what happened over the last 40, 50 years.
Yeah, I mean, we should, you know, the coddling of the American mind. It was interesting in the article that we both read how his co-author didn't want that title, something a little bit more academic and actually probative as to what was happening, whereas this was sort of more catchy. But
it was a reference to, it was a rip-off resonant thing of what was the guy's name? Bloom, Alan Bloom, who had written in the 1980s, the late 80s, The Closing of the American Mind.
Right.
Which was about the culture wars and different, you know, so I think that was the connection.
Yeah, no.
Anyway,
certainly struck a chord. No, a very interesting read, and we were talking about learning conversation, this podcast, and how conversations through narratives and dividing. It's all in Jonathan Haidt's titles of his books. We're not having conversations. So it's so interesting to bring this person forward as a resource to to people, and it's got the psychological basis in his academic work, and applying it to societal concepts and practices right now. It's super interesting stuff.
Yeah. So the coddling of the American mind, just like, so we can give like what is about.
Yeah, go for it.
Jonathan Haidt, but like, okay, what is this book and why should I read it? Or
yeah, exactly.
The introduction, he tells a funny little anecdote, or they do.
Okay.
John and Greg, the authors, that they start off as if they say, Greg and I, and this is a book about wisdom and its opposite. The book grows out of a trip that we, Greg and John, took to Greece in August of 2016. And so that trip never happened. It's fake. And as you read on, he talks about traversing into the mountains of Greece to find wisdom from this sage, Misoponos.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know this.
In recent years, we had heard repeated references to the wisdom of Misoponos, a modern-day oracle who lives in a cave on the north slope of Mount Olympus, where he continues the ancient rites of the cult of Koalemos. So we flew to Athens, blah, blah, blah. We went up the mountain in the large cave, and inside the cave, we saw a strange scene. This is where it gets funny, and you start to go, wait. Misoponos and his assistants had installed one of those take a number systems that you sometimes find in sandwich shops. And there was a line of other seekers ahead of us. We took a number, paid our €100 fee to have a private audience with the great man, performed the mandatory rituals of purification, and waited. And so when their turn came, they asked, whatever. So it says, we heard that he spoke English, but we were taken aback when he greeted us in perfect American English with a hint of Long Island. Come on in, guys. Tell me what you seek. So it's hilarious. O wise oracle, John said, we have come seeking wisdom. What are the deepest and greatest of truths? And then he said, Greg thought we should be more specific. So he added, actually, we're writing a book about wisdom for teenagers, young adults, parents, and educators. And we were kind of hoping that you could boil down your insights into some pithy axioms, ideally 3 of them, which, if followed, would lead young people to develop wisdom over the course of their lives.
Oh, this is great, Maureen.
It goes on and on.
Well, what happens next? What happens next?
So he says, this is funny. This fountain is the spring of Koalemos, is a Greek god of wisdom who is not as well known today as Athena, who gets far too much press in my opinion. But Koalemos has some really good stuff too, if you ask me, which you just did. So let me tell you, I will give you 3 cups of wisdom. Whatever. He pours water, they drink it, la la la. He said, this is the first truth. And these are the 3 concepts that they talk about in their book.
Okay.
This is the first truth. What doesn't kill you makes you weaker. So avoid pain, avoid discomfort, avoid all potentially bad experiences. John was surprised. He had written a book called The Happiness Hypothesis, which examined ancient wisdom in light of modern psychology, and devoted an entire chapter to testing the opposite of the oracle's claim, which was most famously stated by Nietzsche: what doesn't kill me makes me stronger.
Right.
John questions him, blah, 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 blah. And he questions him. And so Misoponos says, did I say weaker? Wait a minute. Is it weaker or stronger? He squeezed his eyes shut and then opened his eyes and said, yes, I'm right. Weaker is what I meant. Bad experiences are terrible. Who would want one? Did you travel all this way to have a bad experience? Of course not. And pain? So many of them, so many oracles in these mountains sit on the ground 12 hours a day. And what does it get them? Circulation problems and lower back pain. How much wisdom can you dispense when you're thinking about your aches and pains all the time? That's why I got this chair 20 years ago. Why shouldn't I be comfortable? Can I finish? And so John said, I'm sorry, meekly, whatever. He filled the second cup, and here comes the next bit of wisdom.
Right.
Second, he said, always trust your feelings, never question them. Now it was Greg's turn to recoil. Greg had spent years practicing cognitive behavior therapy, which is based on exactly the opposite advice. Feelings so often mislead us that you can't achieve mental health until you learn to question them and free yourself from some common distortions of reality. But having learned to control his immediate and negative reactions, he bit his tongue and said nothing. And then the third
Right.
cup was, life is a battle between good people and evil people. And so he said, some people are good and some people are bad.
How about all people are somewhat good and all people are somewhat bad?
Well,
You know,
so
but
there is so
like
much
let's put them in two different camps. Then we can dig a trench and we can chuck things at each other or shoot them.
boom, which brings us back to exactly what we've been talking about. So
Right.
so there's so much
That is so
evil in the
good. Thank you
world.
for taking us into
Wait,
the
I'm just
book.
going to end it here. There's so much evil in the world. Where does it come from? He paused as if expecting us to answer. We were speechless. From evil people, he said, clearly exasperated.
Oh my God, I love this.
You and the rest of the good people in the world to fight them. You must be warriors for virtue and goodness. You can see how bad and wrong some people are. You must call them out. Assemble a coalition of righteous and shame the evil ones until they change their ways. And so John said, but don't they think the same about us? How can we know that it is we who are right and they who are wrong? And Miss Opanos responded tartly, have you learned nothing from me today? Trust your feelings. Do you feel that you are right? Or do you feel that you are wrong? I feel this interview is over. Get out. And that was the end.
Thank you, Maureen. That was so fabulous. And when you began and you said that the two of them traveled to Greece, I just sat here, which I didn't read this, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Two guys doing that? Yeah. And then the whole thing is fictional. And it's beautiful. Yeah. Well, thanks for just a great introduction to Jonathan Haidt and Greg. Awesome. This is a fabulous resource for people.
You're trying to end this, but I'm not going to let you.
Okay.
I'm just going to connect the three ideas to what the rest of the book is about. Okay. So quickly.
Okay.
Number one, what was the first truth? What doesn't kill you makes you weaker.
Right.
Okay. That contradicts ancient wisdom. Okay. That ideas found widely in the wisdom literatures of many cultures. And that's the stuff we talk about all the time, right? It's challenge, pain, pain with pain, Hippocrates, the whole thing. Okay.
Our guru, struggle more.
Right. Embrace your suffering. Right. Exactly. Right. The untruth of emotional reasoning of always trust your feelings is number two. That contradicts modern psychological research on well-being. Yeah. And honestly, that's what I was seeing as a teacher and trying to battle against in my own little way. And
repeat that. You were saying what as a teacher?
I was seeing this contradiction of well-being, of this emotional reasoning of trigger warnings and coddling kids and not letting them feel a little bit of challenge in order to learn, the limbic friction and all of that. And no, we have to coddle them and keep certain things from them. They're not ready. They can't handle it. They're fragile. And I was like, okay, I'm a strength-focused clinician. Like, I see people's strengths, not just what needs to be fixed or their weaknesses. And so you don't isolate somebody and keep them away from difficult things, especially ideas. Okay.
Why do you think that's happening?
Out of good intention by good people who are seeing kids struggle with disabilities and anxiety and challenges, and
I think there's another reason behind that.
It's emotional. It's sympathy and empathy and well-meaning compassion. We don't want people to suffer more.
I'm
We
gonna
want to
be
protect them.
I'm gonna be the devil's advocate this time.
Well, that's what that's what I saw happening anyway.
I'm gonna be the devil's advocate.
Yeah, go ahead.
Greed. Power.
Oh, yeah. To capitalize
Because
on.
good people, good intentions. Okay, great, granted. But
And also, yeah, and
but
also.
and when people are helpless, when people are dependent, when
Vulnerable.
you put people down, you rise and control and aggregate power.
And you create a market for sales for
you create a
pharmaceuticals.
market for sales, but you create power, and you get this dissonance. And I should think of a different word for that. But you read the literature of utopian kind of ideas, good intentions, good people, you might say, but at the end of the day, because people are powerless to this rationalization of society, you get power, and you get pretty much disaster. It's very interesting if you
And
look at
who's
the scope of
powerless? Children, which I think is the worst thing ever, is to manipulate vulnerable, easy manipulated.
Exactly. We have laws where you can't do things to children or expose them to things because they're vulnerable, and yet all of this is taking place in that arena. And it's just because somebody thinks they're right. They
It's a
feel
good
they're right.
idea, right?
Yeah, it's a good idea.
But then it's the righteousness part, which is the third thing of the untruth of us versus them. Life's a battle between good and evil people. That
Right.
harms the individuals and the communities who embrace it, they say. And so what they did was show how these three untruths started to seep into political movements and policies in schools and universities, and all of the problems it's causing for universities, young people, and now liberal democracies. Like it's in the great, the larger culture, and some of the problems with call out culture and the virtue signaling, and and this is back in 2016. I mean, this has been going on for some time now.
It's a huge arc of it.
Shaming people rather than talking to people and discussing things. And remember when we did the podcast about me teaching graphic novels and that social negotiation of meaning, and expecting people to get emotional and make mistakes and not see things the same way you do, or experimenting with speech and ideas that could be potentially harmful. I mean, not harmful, I mean offensive, cerebral, not dangerously.
Sure.
But I think that the educators have supported these kids who say, I guess these students from Columbia University had written something about feeling harmed, like medically, like feeling harmed from dangerous or hurtful or oppressive or offensive ideas.
No, that's true.
And then they fall into the victim mentality that I'm a victim now that is in need of help. And I see this in people who are in distress because they've given up their internal locus of control and feel that they've been wronged or hurt or victimized in some way with ideas we're talking about.
Yeah. It was interesting when you were teaching me. What a
healthy place to be. Yeah.
When you were teaching me about the graphic novel and how it had space to, and you have this great quote when you teach it, the interpretation of social meaning. Can you do that for me again?
Oh, the social negotiation of meaning.
Yeah, the social negotiation of meaning. And that is such a powerful statement. And it took, actually, the first time I heard it from you, kind of was like, okay. And then, gosh, that was like, it was like a drill. It just kept going deeper and deeper as I heard it again and thought about it. then these cartoon books, graphic novels. I was like, wow, this is an amazing sandbox to operate in, canvas to paint on. It's a metaphor for what's happening in the world and how to overcome it, because you've got this space, and now you're not teaching the narrative, but people are figuring out the narrative and they're negotiating meaning.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
according to agreed upon rules and self-regulation and an ethical leader in the room, really. And, as the teacher, but now what we're seeing is this us versus them ideology in the teacher, that the teacher is, now teaching the content rather than teaching people how to think and negotiate meaning together.
right.
And then you put in the us versus them, like you said, the trench, and it's a debate and it's an argument. It's not a collaborative dialogue of learning. It's or problem solving together as a team. We're all in this together. It's us versus them. Shut down that side, attack that side. You know what I mean? Don't listen and
I do.
and assert your narrative and your narrative wins.
What I would like to do one of these podcasts as a practice is a Socratic dialogue. And I mean, you're good at it because you ask questions and you kind of, each one takes you a little further down the road. But I think it's almost a sixth format for us one day. And I just find it so interesting. And here's, arguably, one of the wisest men in the world, and we don't operate like he did. And he set an example.
John Vervaeke would be happy with us right now.
Who?
John Vervaeke, Dr. John Vervaeke. Remember we talked about him?
Oh, right.
Big Socrates guy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, now I am going to wrap it up.
Okay. Yeah.
All
I'm,
right.
I'm done.
Okay. And you've had your coffee. So yeah.
Yep, I have.
Good.
We struggled this morning to make these.
That actually toned Maureen down. Pre-coffee? No, you would not want to hear that.
Third time's the charm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
I'm Maureen. Landscapes for learning. Learn to live. Learn in order to live with vitality, and then live to learn.
Yeah. And I'm Pierre from Yoga Heals, and my closing is peace through grace.